Chapter 10. Lolly was a lumpy woman who spoke too loudly and who wore too much lipstick. She entered the house and was immediately spotted Edward sitting on the living room couch. "What's this?" she said. She put down her suitcase, picked up Edward by one foot. She held him upside down. "That's Susanna," said Nellie. "Susanna!" shouted Lolly. She gave Edward a shake. His dress went up over his head and he could see nothing. Already he formed a deep and abiding dislike for Lolly. "Your father found her," said Nellie. "She came up in a net, and she didn't have any clothes on, so I made her some dresses." "Have you gone crazy?" shouted Lolly. "Rabbits don't need clothes." "Well," said Nellie, her voice shook, "this one seems to." Lolly tossed Edward back on the couch. He landed face down with his arms over his head and his dress still over his face, and he stayed that way all through dinner. "Why have you got that old high chair?" shouted Lolly. "Oh, don't pay it no mind," said Nellie. "Your father was just gluing on a missing piece, weren't you, Lawrence?" "That's right," said Lawrence without looking up from his plate. Of course, after dinner, Edward did not go outside and stand beneath the stars to have a smoke with Lawrence, and Nellie, for the first time since Edward had been there, did not sing him a lullaby. In fact, Edward was ignored and forgotten about until the next morning, when Lolly picked him up again, pulled his dress down away from his face, and stared him in the eye. "Got the old folks bewitched, don't you?" said Lolly. "I heard the talk in the town. They've been treating you like a rabbit child." Edward stared back at Lolly. Her lipstick was a bright, bloody red. He felt a cold breeze blow through the room. Was there a door open somewhere? "Well, you don't fool me," she said. She gave him a shake. "We'll be taking a trip together, you and me." Holding Edward by the ears, Lolly marched into the kitchen, shoved him face down in the garbage can. "Ma," Lolly shouted, "I'm taking the truck. I'm going to head out and do some errands." "Okay," said Nellie. "What's wonderful, dear. Goodbye." "Goodbye," thought Edward, as Lolly hauled the garbage can to the truck. "Goodbye," Nellie called again, louder this time. Edward felt a sharp pain somewhere deep inside his chest. For the first time, his heart was calling out to him, and it said two words: "Nellie, Lawrence." Chapter 11. Edward ended up at the dump. He lay on top of orange peels and coffee grounds and old bacon and rubber tires. The first night, he was at the top of the garbage heap, so he was able to look up at the stars and find comfort in them. In the morning, a short man came climbing through the trash and rubble. He stopped as he was standing on top of the highest pile. He put his hand under his armpits and flapped his elbows. The man crowed loudly. He shouted, "Who am I? I'm Ernest. Ernest, king of the world. How can I be king of the world? Because I am king of the garbage dump. And the garbage is what the world was made of. Ha ha ha! Therefore I am Ernest, king of the world," he crowed again. Ernest was inclined to agree with Ernest's assessment of the world being made of Edward was inclined to agree with Ernest's assessment of the world being made of garbage, especially after the second day at the dump, when a loud truck came and deposited trash directly on top of him. He lay there, buried alive. He could not see the stars. He could not see the sky. He could not see anything. What kept Edward going, what gave him hope, was thinking of how he would find Lolly and exact his revenge. He would pick her up by the ears and bury her under a mountain of trash. But almost 40 days and nights had passed, and the weight and the smell of the garbage above and below him clouded Edward's thoughts. And soon he gave up thinking about revenge and gave in to despair. It was worse, much worse than being buried at sea. It was worse because Edward was a different rabbit now. He couldn't say how he was different. He just knew he was. He remembered again Pellegrina's story about the princess who had loved nobody. The witch turned her into a warthog because she loved nobody. He understood that now. He heard Pellegrina say, "You disappoint me." "Why?" he asked her. "Why do I disappoint you?" But he knew the answer to that question now. It was because he had not loved Abilene, and now she was gone from him, and he would never be able to make it right. And Nellie and Lawrence were gone from him too, and he missed them terribly. He wanted to be with them. The rabbit wondered if that was love. Day after day passed, and Edward was aware of time passing only because every morning he could hear Ernest performing his dawn ritual, crackling and crowing about being the king of the garbage world. On his 180th day at the dump, salvation arrived for Edward in a most unusual way. The garbage around him was shifted. The rabbit heard the sniffing and the panting of a dog. Then came the frenzied sound of digging. The garbage shifted again, and suddenly, miraculously, the beautiful sky of late afternoon shone on Edward's face.